right again. I really hate it that I keep being right about really crappy things. I really do. I wish I were wrong. And how many people are going to say that to you? I wish I were wrong. Well, look, I really do wish I were wrong. But I'm not. And so let's talk about this. All right, today the Fed comes out, and as I predicted, and as I've been predicting for months, they did not raise interest rates. And they did not raise interest rates because it would destroy the stock market. And the stock market is where the banks have been making their money for the past 8 years. They haven't been making it on operations like lending it into the economy. They've been making it by creating money out of the air based upon the Federal Reserve's rule of 10 to 1. They can create money up to 10 times their deposits. So that's what they've been doing, and they've been using that money to pump up the stock market. If they didn't have that, they'd have nothing. But that's what's keeping the banks alive, the ability to print money themselves for their own purposes. Okay, so why didn't they raise rates? Let's go over this again. They did not raise rates today because they can't. Okay, why didn't they raise rates today? They did not raise rates today because there's not enough currency being generated and loaned into the economy, new currency, to pay the interest on the old currency. Let me see if I can explain that. Because the Federal Reserve System is populated with dollars that are loaned into existence. That's how a dollar is created. It's loaned at interest into the economy. And because they're loaned at interest, but they don't loan the money to print to pay the interest, you have to keep borrowing more dollars. Well, what happens when borrowing goes down? What happens when people aren't borrowing any more money into the economy? Well, that means that they can't pay the interest because you need new dollars to pay the interest on the old dollars. You see what I'm saying? So they didn't raise interest rates. One good reason is because there'd be even less borrowing in the economy at a higher rate than there is at a lower rate. But that's not the big reason. The biggest reason is that at 0%, the cost of dollars is so low that it's negligible. So money is free to those who have access to it. Well, that's the banker class. That is the corporate class. They can generate more profits if they don't have to pay interest on the monies that they borrow. So it works out to their benefit. Secondly, and it's what I was talking about just a minute ago, you might have heard the Fed a time or two talk about a 2% inflation target. And everybody stands around and acts like that's just perfectly reasonable. Well, what they really mean by that is that they've targeted 2% of the value of your cash to claim as their own over the next year. Get that? They've targeted 2% of the value of your cash to claim as their own over the next year. That's what an annual 2% inflation target is. The way that this system works is that you've got to keep generating more and more cash into circulation to pay the interest on the old cash. So if they can inflate by putting in 2% more cash into the economy than the economy actually would use based upon the goods and services being produced, the GDP, then the difference is that there's more dollars chasing less goods, and that causes inflation. And that also creates enough cash in the system to pay the bankers for the use of the money. That's what it's all about. That's how the system works. In fact, that's how the world works. It's a scam. Everything's a scam. I hate it, but everything is just a scam. I don't make it that way. It just is. And so I keep being right about these things, and I've started documenting all the things that I've been right about for the past 4 or 5 years as they come up each day on Facebook. I said this 4 years ago. Well, look, I was right. I said this 3 years ago. Well, look, I was right. Well, for the past several months, I've told you, the Federal Reserve is never going to raise rates. Never going to raise rates. Again, I mean, I'm talking about ever. Unless they decide, and I'll give you this qualification, unless they decide to shuck it all, unless they just decide to short the market and just cream everything that they can and just destroy the entire U.S. economy, and with it the world economy, and claim it all as their own, and then walk away. There's no way that they're ever going to raise rates again, because they can't. The system is broke. The Federal Reserve system is broke. The banks of the Federal Reserve are broke. Wall Street banks are broke. That's because it's not a matter of printing money in order to be solvent. It's a matter of being able to print the money, loan it into the economy, and have it being paid back at interest that makes this banking system solvent. And that doesn't happen. It can't happen, because they have successfully destroyed the American economy by keeping the banks alive. See, at one time, back in 2008, 2009, it was either the banks or the American people. And Congress and President Obama had their choice. Either, and Bush, either let's keep the banks alive, or let's let the banks bankrupt, go through whatever we're going to go through, and save the people. But they sided with the banks because the banks have the money and the banks have the power over the U.S. Congress. So there they were, saving the banks at the expense of the American people. And it's been that way ever since. And it won't change until a real leader gets in there. Hopefully that leader will be Donald Trump. It's not good news, except for the fact that there's going to be a change in Washington come January. And if that change is Donald Trump, and I believe it will be, as long as nothing untoward happens, which I can't guarantee, then there's a real chance we could pull out of this. Because everything I tell you, he knows. I can tell. You can't kid a kidder. And everything that I tell you, he already knows. He's on it. That's why we got to make sure and get Donald Trump in as our president, and see if we can't pull out of this thing. It's going to be a bad time either way to try to get out of this, but ultimately we got to pay the piper. There is no free lunch.